All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Island Time. We're lucky enough to have another really special episode for you guys. We had the Nanaimo Ladysmith candidate Paul Manley for the Green Party on today. So yeah, super excited. We had some great conversations with him, and it was an awesome time.
Yeah, we did reach out to every candidate, as we said before. This isn't about pushing any political views onto anybody or any political parties. This was strictly just to get to know this candidate, which happened to be Paul Manley. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Island Time. Today we have a very special guest. He has a diploma in broadcasting from Algonquin College in Ottawa and a degree in media studies and global studies from right here at Vancouver Island University. He was first elected in a historic 2019 by-election. He became the second Green MP elected to Canada's House of Commons. He was recently awarded the King Charles Coronation Medal for his significant contributions to the Nanaimo Ladysmith community. The list of what he's achieved is as impressive as it is extensive. So, without further ado, Paul Manley, welcome to Island Time.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. So Paul, there's an election coming up, but I kind of wanted to ask you about this. A lot of young folks are asking me this too. Like, what's your journey to get into politics? Like, did you start at a quite young age, or like, how did you get into where you are now?
Well, I was what you'd call an orange diaper baby.
Okay.
So my dad ran when I was 4 or 5 years old.
Yep.
In 1969 for the NDP when Thomas Berger was the leader. And surprisingly, looking at some of his campaign literature, he was calling for the legalization of marijuana.
Interesting.
And I got chased off my first porch when I was 7 years old, dropping leaflets when Dave Barrett was elected. And then my mom ran in politics. She sought the nomination for the provincial NDP. My dad was elected in 1979 or 1980. I was born and raised on Vancouver Island, and then I moved to Ottawa when I was 16, and my dad was a member of parliament for 8 years. I watched what my dad did, and I decided that was not for me at all. And I started playing. I was a professional musician. My first career, I played trombone in high school, but I started playing bass when I was 17 and started playing nightclubs when I was 18 and played professionally for 10 years and got into artist management. I've managed bands toured around Ontario and Quebec. Then I managed bands and got record deals and toured bands around the world. And then I got into filmmaking. I went back to school for broadcasting. I actually went to school studied jazz at Humber College for a year, decided that was too far into one side, and went into computer engineering and got straight A's, but then I was like too far to the other side of my brain. So I went into broadcasting. Because I didn't think rock and roll was going to change the world. And I went into broadcasting and got a diploma in broadcasting. When I was a musician, I used to throw shows, environmental benefits and social justice benefits. That's how I first met Elizabeth May in 1989. I was the headlining act fronting a band at the conference center in Ottawa. And I met David Suzuki that way. I met Farley Mowat that way, just putting on shows for different causes. And then I got into filmmaking and really focused on social justice and environmental issues. I worked in television, did educational television in the 90s. I produced the pilot for the first preschool show on APTN, and then I worked on 64 episodes of that show, and I trained a lot of the crew there. And then with the documentaries, I just, you dig into issues, you talk to a lot of people, you're looking for solutions, and it kind of just led me to politics in a way, because I felt like that was sort of the next stage rather than standing on the outside and pointing to problems and pointing to solutions, to get into politics and actually work on legislation to enact the solutions that I was seeing, and just take my voice to a different level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of like you were born into it a bit, then you went the other path, and then it came full circle moment kind of thing, which is, that's really cool. So now that you're running with the Green Party, how did that happen? Like, how do you choose which party? Like as a young person, if you wanted to get involved with politics, or like, how do you decide which party you want to run for?
Well, I'll tell you, I did try to run for the NDP.
Okay.
But in 2012, both my parents have been involved in social justice issues. That's where I really got that drive.
Right.
And my dad had spent time, he gave a human rights award to Rigoberto Menchu in Guatemala during the Guatemalan Revolution. My parents did human rights accompaniment together in Guatemala. My mom and my younger brother did refugee returns from Chiapas into Guatemala at the end of the Civil War. And they started doing solidarity work with First Nations in Canada in 1959 when my dad was the United Church minister in Kitimat Village. And they really connected with the injustice that had happened to Indigenous people in Canada, and had worked with them for a long time. In the late, sort of mid-2000s, they turned their attention to Israel and Palestine. And my dad was on a boat to Gaza with members of parliament and former members of parliament from around the world. It was a sailing ship called the Estelle, and he was seized illegally in international waters by the Israeli military. He was held incommunicado for 6 days. For 5 days, we hadn't heard from him, and he almost turned 80 in an Israeli prison. And I happened to be the one that the media found at home. My mom was at a conference in Toronto, and the media started showing up at my door. And so I did a lot of interviews about why my father was trying to break the blockade of Gaza with humanitarian supplies. And I tried to get our MP to speak out for my dad, and she told me that she wasn't allowed to, that she was basically muzzled by Tom Mulcair, and nobody in the party would speak up for somebody who was an elder statesman in the party. My dad had been a member of parliament for 8 years, and I campaigned with Tommy Douglas when I was a teenager. So I wrote the NDP a letter, and I said, this is outrageous that nobody in the party is willing to speak out for my dad. The Conservatives were saying, let him rot in prison, the Conservative government at the time. And I said, Tommy Douglas would have spoke out for my dad. It might not be the popular thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And that letter got leaked to the media. And the next day it was a front page news story. And I did some interviews, and I just said, yeah, that's my email. That's what I said. And when I tried to run for the NDP in 2014, Tom Mulcair blocked me from running, along with 14 other people who thought that Palestinians should have human rights. Anybody that mentioned Palestinian human rights was blocked from running for the NDP. And Elizabeth May is the one person that spoke out in Parliament for my dad. And I'd known her for a few decades and would run into her now and then. I was on the national board of the Council of Canadians and would run into her with Maud Barlow and stuff like that. So she started asking me to run. I think she asked me 5 times. I said no 4 times. And finally, the last...
She got you on the 5th.
She got me on the 5th time. My sister was on one side and Elizabeth May was on the other side. Had gone out for dinner in Toronto. I was at a Council of Canadians AGM. And they both kind of roughed me up, and I said, okay, I'll do it. So then I talked to my folks, and my folks decided that they were going to support me 100%, and they joined the Green Party as well. And I ran in 2015, my first run at the Green Party.
Crazy. Well, I wanted to ask you, what motivates you to run in federal versus provincial politics?
Well, that actually provincial politics actually speaks to me a lot as well. All levels of government speak to me. There's different things you can do at different levels of government. But one of the things that I learned Well, I worked on campaigns. I was a human rights observer in Chiapas, Mexico, during the Zapatista uprisings. I just went there to be a northern presence to make sure that people weren't being abused. I was documenting paramilitary activity and military activity. First time I've ever had an M16 pointed at me and been ordered around at the receiving end of an M16. And that was related to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and Indigenous people losing the rights to communal land under that agreement. And when I started to dig into the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, one of the things that I learned about was Chapter 11, which is the investor-state dispute settlement provisions that allow corporations to seek financial compensation, basically to sue governments for laws and policies that get in the way of their profitability. So if we put it in laws and policies that block their profitability, it's called indirect expropriation, and they can seek financial compensation for the loss of potential profit. So not for actual losses, but what they think they might lose.
Right. So they can come up with kind of any number and just say, oh, we thought we could have won or got this out of this. Yeah, well, that's crazy.
It is crazy. And Canada's paid out hundreds of millions of dollars. And what happens is in the developing world, European countries, North American countries have forced a lot of these trade agreements onto countries in the developing world, and Canadian companies, mining companies in particular, are seeking billions of dollars in compensation from countries like Ecuador, Chile, other places where they're wanting to impose extraction projects, like big mines or fossil fuel projects on countries where communities don't want it. And the NAFTA was just the beginning of those investor-state dispute settlement provisions. They're also in the CETA agreement with the European Union. They're in the TPP agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and they're in what's called Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreements. And we have signed in Canada about 46 of those agreements. And during the Harper years, the Harper government signed a FIPA agreement with China. And so the difference between that agreement and these other 45 agreements was that both parties had to agree to make any dispute public. And so right now we could have Chinese state-owned corporations seeking financial compensation from the Canadian government for laws and policies that we've put in place to block a pipeline, to block a mine, to block, say they bought out all of the private managed forest lands that surround this community. There's 8,000 square kilometers of private managed forest lands because of the ENN land grant. If they bought that and then we decided that we wanted to have a change in the way forestry is done on private managed forest lands to match what you can do on crown land, say like smaller cut blocks, better management for biodiversity, they could sue us for loss of potential profit.
Crazy.
If they wanted to put a mine in our watershed, our community drinking watershed, because we don't have regulations that say, special protections, potentially they could do that. So those are, when I saw what the Stephen Harper conservatives did with signing this agreement with China, I was pretty outraged. I actually had been working on a film about the SPP, the Security and Prosperity Partnership, which after 9/11, it was like deep integration between the NAFTA countries. It was for Fortress North America. And so there was integrating of the military, of our security intelligence, of our police forces, Coast Guards, but also deregulation, a process of regulatory harmonization between the three countries, so that we were actually dumbing down our regulations to the lowest common denominator. So if the lowest common denominator for labor standards happened to be Mexico, that's where it went. If it was for food standards, the use of certain dyes in in America, that's where the regulation went. And so Stephen Harper talked about, oh, this is just about jelly beans, and it's not a big deal. But actually it was. And we fought hard against that. In 2007, I videotaped 3 police officers dressed as radical protesters attacking their own riot squad with rocks, banging rocks into shields, and trying to rouse up the crowd to start a riot. It was what was a peaceful protest in Montebello, Quebec. That was my first YouTube video. It made news around the world. It's had almost 1 million views, not a lot by today's standard, but almost 1 million views right away. And that was part of that campaign to stop the Security Prosperity Partnership, which was put to an end in 2009, 6 months after my film came out, exposing it for what it was. Yeah. And, we had great Canadian companies that were negotiating on behalf of Canada in that process. So it was like 20 corporations from each country that were negotiating on behalf of each country. And so we had great Canadian corporations like Home Depot Canada, Ford Canada, GM Canada, Chevron Canada, Walmart Canada, etc., negotiating on behalf of Canadians. Those are all branch plant U.S. corporations. And this is, so this goes back to this whole thing around trade agreements. The free trade agreement in the 1988 by the Conservatives basically turned Canada into a branch plant for U.S. corporations. NAFTA, they negotiated in 92, came into force in 94, brought in investor-state dispute settlements. And then we had a whole bunch of FIPA agreements signed, and then the agreement with China, which was basically allowed Chinese corporations to buy up things like Nexon Energy. They bought up long-term care homes here in one in Nanaimo, part of a larger corporation with group long-term care homes in different parts of Western Canada. And I just found it abhorrent. 75% of our oil and gas industry is foreign owned.
Yeah. I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because that seems like it's a trending thing in this election. Is Canadians seem to agree on the whole thing is that we want to take back control of our resources, right? How would you say, what are some steps to ensure that that's done and actually done in a sustainable way?
So, there's a number of things that we need to do. When I was first elected, I was involved in the debate around replacing NAFTA with the CUSMA agreement. So and we got rid of Chapter 11. So it didn't carry over into CUSMA. So we got rid of the investor state stuff. Right. With our resources, we need to just stop exporting raw materials. Yeah. And so, when the Liberals and Conservatives are talking about building pipelines, they're talking about exporting raw resources for foreign multinationals. And a lot of them are American companies. How is it that is going to benefit the Canadian economy? Yeah. Right? Well, we talk about raw log exports, so 2.7 million cubic meters of raw logs leave the coast of British Columbia, most of them from the east coast of Vancouver Island. Those logs should be used. Canadian trees should be used in Canadian mills with Canadian workers creating Canadian products. That's Canadian lumber for Canadian homes. Yeah. And furniture, and we should be doing what the Swedes do, which is, Swedish for common sense. Let's pack it up into a box and export it with some crazy instructions. Yeah. And make the most out of value-added products from our resources.
Sense. Yeah, it's almost like common sense when you think, especially when you say it like that. The lumber is here. Instead of just shipping it off, we can employ more people to actually make a finished product that people can use,
and we can sell it for more as well, right?
100%. It totally makes sense. When you talk about exporting LNG, you need to think about what's going to happen, and Australia is a great example of this. So in Australia, they were paying about $4 a gigajoule for energy. I think right now consumers here pay about $6 a gigajoule. In Australia, as soon as their first LNG terminal fired up, the price went up 5 times. So they went from $4 a gigajoule to $20 a gigajoule. when the Ukrainian war broke out, the price of natural gas skyrocketed, and Australians were paying $800 a gigajoule for energy.
Wow.
So the consumers in Australia, their costs went through the roof. So if we're exporting natural gas and consumers then end up having to pay world prices, then we're going to see all this fluctuation in the market. When we should be using those resources, first of all, natural gas is not a great replacement for coal because we're fracking it, which means we're releasing methane in the fracking process all down the chain where we lose methane to the point where if you turn on your stove, you're releasing methane into the atmosphere. It's 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2 is. And it stays up there for 20 years and it does a lot of damage as a greenhouse gas. So we shouldn't pretend that is a transition fuel at all, because it's not. When you consider all of those aspects of it, it's as dangerous as coal to our climate as dangerous as coal to our climate. So, and also, like, when you're burning natural gas in your home, you're releasing the byproducts are benzene, which is a carcinogen, nitrogen oxide, which causes asthma and COPD. So you're poisoning your own airspace, right? And so this is one of those things like Fortis BC, one of the people running against me, Michelle Corfield, is on the board of Fortis BC. They went after the city of Nanaimo in a huge way when we put in a zero carbon step code that said you can't heat your home or heat your hot water with natural gas. You can have a natural gas fireplace if you want. You can still use a natural gas stove, although I would advise against it. And when I was questioning the person from Fortis presenting at City Council, I asked him if they'd seen the research, because it's well published. There's lots of research around this. And they said, well, we're aware of that conversation. They wouldn't even call it research. We're aware of that conversation. Yeah. But, exporting these raw resources, back to your question, if we are going to need natural gas for certain industries, like heavy industry. You don't need it for your home. I have solar panels on my roof. I produce 70% of my energy needs on my roof. When in the wintertime, it's raining and the sun isn't shining, guess what's full? The dams. In the summertime, when there's droughts, the sun is shining and I'm selling energy into the system. And I build up credits, and I run out of credits somewhere around February or March, right? And I start to build my credit system again in July and August.
Very interesting. I feel my neighbors had that similar setup. I know in Canada, it's like very seasonal. Yep. So in summer, you get way more energy than you need. And then in winter, you don't get enough. So it's like that. But a lot of places in the world, it would work all year round. Yeah. Right. So
with hydro, it works all year round.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just to go back to exporting and pipelines. So we have all these proposals for let's get bitumen to Tidewater. Well, look, bitumen isn't something we should be burning. That is to make, you can make high value plastics with bitumen. You just need an upgrader to do it. And in the upgrading process, you're cracking molecules. I used to be on the board of Mid-Island Co-op, so I'd go to the conferences in Saskatoon, and I'd talk to the guys that run the energy department, and Federated Co-ops owns the seventh largest refinery in Canada in Regina. So I learned a lot about cracking molecules. And when you're upgrading bitumen, byproducts are gasoline, propane, diesel. So you can put a little more of that into the system as we transition away from those things. But then you create high value plastics, and then you can export that. I would also argue you can create high value plastics from hemp, and we've known that for a long time as well. Yeah. So we need to transition away. But the idea that you're going to build pipelines to create jobs and build your economy is really a lot of nonsense, because the jobs are short term. You're going to build that pipeline, then you're going to just be exporting raw materials, and who benefits? Foreign multinationals that own the system, that own the pipelines, that own the export facilities. LNG Canada, you've heard of that? Sounds pretty Canadian, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's 5 foreign multinationals. Right? Wow. 2 of them are state-owned. Petronas from Malaysia, PetroChina from China, and then you got Mitsubishi from Japan, Korea Gas, and Royal Dutch Shell.
There's
crazy. Nothing Canadian about it.
See, Paul, I wanted to transition because you've actually been in the House of Commons before, and I find that very fascinating. What is that like to go and speak there? And what is the whole process when you want to bring things to the table, especially coming from a community like Nanaimo?
So people come to me with issues and challenges that they're facing, and so what I do is I look for solutions. And for example, I had a group here of self-advocates from the disability community, and they were concerned about MAID, the Medical Assistance in Dying legislation, the Dying with Dignity legislation, and they said there wasn't enough protection for people with disabilities. So I looked at what they were talking about, and I developed 5 resolutions that were all done in coordination with Inclusion BC. And then what I do is I took that to committee, the Justice Committee, and I wasn't on the Justice Committee, but they allowed me to. The party just said, "Yeah, go ahead, do it." And I got the Conservatives to support 5 of the amendments, and I got the Bloc, the NDP, and the Liberals to support 2 of them. So 2 of them passed. The other 3 were the ones that really protected people with disabilities to make sure that their needs were being met before they were choosing death. So they weren't choosing death because their life was so unbearable because they were living in poverty, and they weren't getting their basic needs as disabled people. So people will bring things to me, and I'll take amendments to bills. I tabled my own motions on things, a wide range of issues, and I tabled private members' bills. And there's a lottery system when you go in at the beginning of the parliamentary session. They just go through a lottery and they pull out numbers, pull out names, and that's the list of private members' stuff. So if your name comes up on the top of the list, you're going to get your bill on the table, debated, and through all the stages for legislation. And Elizabeth May has passed 2 private members' bills that way. I've gotten unanimous consent motions passed. British pensioners came to me and said that their pensions aren't indexed in Canada, but they're indexed in the United States, right? So if you live across the line, you get a fully indexed pension. But if you're a British pensioner living in Canada, some like a veteran or anything, doesn't matter. You didn't get a full index pension, which is completely unfair, but it also costs Canada billions of dollars because we're then having to cover the difference.
Right.
And so I got members of parliament from all parties to support it, a unanimous consent motion to really scold the UK government and shame them into doing something different. It hasn't changed yet, but I made front page news in the UK beside Boris Johnson and his crazy hair, saying that the UK needs to stop treating us like a colony.
Yeah.
So there's lots of examples, like, you get question period, and then, you get certain number of questions every week.
Yep.
And when there's speeches, you get opportunities. Usually there's a round of speeches on any bill. And so the Greens will get a certain number of opportunities to have speeches on legislation. And then when somebody has a speech, you pop up to get a question, and the speaker will pick sort of randomly around, and there's kind of an order to it. So they'll, if it's a government member who did the speech, they'll go to the Conservatives, then they'll go to the Bloc, then they'll go to the NDP, and then they'll go to the Greens.
Yep.
And you just keep on standing up. It's kind of like a gopher popping your head up.
You're obviously quite vetted in public speaking, but is that your first time going there? Was it nerve-wracking?
A little bit.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Yeah.
I've been a performer. The problem with the House of Commons is, like, the first time I was speaking in the House of Commons, I was talking about the Canada-China FIPA. And, because
Not starting small.
No, I wasn't starting small at all. The Conservatives were going after the Liberals about their relationship with China. And I was pointing out to them, well, this is what you've done. This is what you created. And I was actually, full bore into it. And just a little ways away from me, a Conservative yells, "Settle down, rookie." I was like, what? That was my first heckle.
Yeah, no kidding.
But they yell at you when you're speaking, and I'm just like, this is ridiculous.
They're allowed
And
to
they
do
call
that?
you names. No, they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to interrupt you when you speak. But
Yeah.
if you ever watch question period, it's just, it's
Yeah.
kind of outrageous.
Yeah, it is.
It's actually very juvenile. And so I've never heckled. I don't call people names. I don't engage in any of that kind of juvenile behavior because I find it quite repulsive. And that actually, it helps me gain the respect of other people.
Totally.
Yeah.
So between, you get these little breaks, sometimes 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you can walk across the floor and talk to a government minister. Sometimes if the seat's empty beside them, you just have a seat with them, you pass them a letter, explain to them a situation that you're needing help with in your riding. And because I don't heckle them, they're quite receptive to me.
Yeah.
I'm not sitting there badgering them across the floor. And I think it's gotten to be, it used to be kind of more of a game. In the, back in the day, they would do this kind of gamesmanship, and then they'd all go out and have a drink and dinner afterwards or whatever, and it wouldn't matter so much. But I think it's gotten really vicious. And, Catherine McKenna called Climate Barbie by conservatives, and just like there's a lot of sexist, misogynistic stuff that happens, and actually racist comments that have been called out. And if the speaker catches them, then they can reprimand the MP, and they need to apologize.
Yeah.
You can't use unparliamentary language. You have to be careful. But honestly, like Elizabeth May will actually flag the speaker and sit down during his speech and say, well, the speaker needs to call this place to order so I can carry on doing my job, because it just gets it gets a little crazy.
Yeah.
Well, bashing people, it's a huge reflection on your character. And
Yeah.
I was wondering, these campaigns I see on TV, it's kind of, some of these commercials are a little bit sickening when I'm seeing people bashing the other candidates. What are your thoughts on those commercials and the way people are campaigning like that?
Unfortunately, negative ad campaigns work.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they do. I mean, it plays to people's fears. It plays to that kind of aggressive nature that some people have. I don't think they work for everybody,
Right.
but you can see how algorithms are working on social media, and rage farming works really well.
Clickbait.
Yeah, clickbait, fear,
Yeah.
those kind of things. It's just it's problematic, because honestly, like we're all a bunch of humans, and we all care. I mean, I think some people are sociopaths, psychopaths for sure, but for the most part, people that seek election are there to serve. They may have a certain ideology or viewpoint that they want to push, but I think that most parliamentarians are there for the right reasons. And we face serious challenges. We face serious challenges as a species, and so we need to work together, at all different levels of government, and then around the planet. So that's why we have the UN. It's not as functional as it could be, but that is the venue that we have to try to work out some of the challenges that we face. And if we don't deal with these things, if we don't start evolving as a species in how we communicate with each other and how we work together, we're really in trouble. And it's not that this planet isn't going to continue to hurtle through space around the sun, and that life forms will continue here unless we really mess it up.
Yeah.
But it threatens our own existence as a species. It's human beings will become extinct from our own hubris, our own stupidity, and our own lack of courage to change and think about things differently.
For sure. I wanted to ask you, we're at VIU right now, and it's awesome that you went here too. I know in BC, post-secondary is it's a federal or it's a provincial mandate.
Yep.
What do you think? Because we're kind of in a crisis right now with post-secondary institutions in Canada. And in my opinion, I think post-secondary is really important to having a sustainable country and well-educated population. What do you think the federal government's role in that is? Do you think the federal government should have a bigger role in post-sec, or how can we navigate that? Especially when traditionally there's been a lot of international students coming to Canada, and now with the changes to IRCC, students don't want to come here. So what do you think? Should the federal government fund post-secondary more, or how does that work?
100% they should be funding it more. So the federal government is the main tax collector. The province collects some taxes and the municipalities collect property taxes. And the way that works with the federal government is that it does transfers. And those transfers are targeted for healthcare, education, and other things. But the provinces aren't bound by the federal government to actually ensure that those transfers go to the things that they're targeted for. They can flow into general revenue, and that's a problem. So we need to make sure that the transfers are targeted. And so the federal government does have a role to play in ensuring that universities, post-secondary institutions, have stable, steady funding. And that funding has eroded over decades, and it's highly problematic. And also, we should be moving to a model, the Scandinavian model, where education is free. You shouldn't have to pay tuition to go to school. We need educated people in this country. And the more educated you are, the better off we are, right?
Yep.
The more you dumb down a population, the more likely you are to have a reality TV star running your country because you're easily bamboozled by gamesmanship.
Yeah.
Right? People think that somebody's actually a successful businessman that is actually gone bankrupt multiple times, including bankrupting a casino. Like, how do you bankrupt a casino? It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So an educated population is super important, especially as we're moving into more high-tech industries. We want to have an educated population. So let's get rid of tuition fees. Let's make sure that universities have stable, steady funding. And then let's make sure that the federal funds that are targeted towards those things are tied to those things and they don't flow into general revenue for the provinces.
So I'm not super, I don't know a lot about the Scandinavian countries and how that works with education, but where do we see the money coming from to be able to pay for school so that people don't have to pay?
Well, you know what we need to do is we need to revise our tax system.
Okay.
And there's a number of proposals that we have. So the Harper Conservatives, they lowered the tax rate for corporations from 21% to 15%. What the Greens are saying is that the small businesses pay 9%, I think up to $500,000 or something like that. You keep the tax rate for small and medium enterprises at 9%, and the large corporations that have $100 million worth of profit or more, make them pay 21%. There's another proposal that was put forward by James Tobin, who is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and this is to put a tax on financial transactions. And it's a minor amount. It's 0.35% is what we're proposing. We've had it costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office as part of our platform. And so 35 cents on $100. And this isn't, a tax that you or I would worry about. It's not at the ATM, and we already get nailed at the ATM anyway by the big banks. It's a tax on transactions for stocks, bonds, money market, because that money is moving around all the time. And you see, when Donald Trump was manipulating the market, and for his buddies, his billionaire buddies, that they're shuffling money in and shuffling money out. Well, if they're paying 0.35% on every one of those shuffles on the Canadian stock market, we'd be raising a lot of funds. And so that proposal, I think over 5 years, would raise $250 billion. Right?
You said 2 years?
What's that?
How many years?
5.
5 years.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, the first year, I think it's like $39 billion. And then because we're, if we enacted it right away, and then it would be in the 45 billion range and going up. And so we could raise a lot of money that way. And that is a tax actually that we should have, right across the planet. And I remember reading about George Soros saying that this is actually something we need to do, because back in the late 90s, the Asian tigers he had put a lot of money in, and people were investing in the Asian tigers like Thailand and Korea and Vietnam and a series of countries. And people were investing in swampland for golf courses and all kinds of crazy things, right? And it was just putting money into the Thai baht. So the Thai baht had gone way up in value. And just in one single move, he pulled out billions of dollars that he had invested in the Thai baht, and he sold it, and the Thai baht crashed. And each of the 7 Asian tigers collapsed. And so he said, I shouldn't be able to do that. He made money hand over fist by crashing an economy. And that's what we're seeing going on in the United States right now. And that is the economic threat that we're facing right here in Canada, is manipulation of the stock market and the money market and the bond market. And when that manipulation happens, those manipulators should be taxed. And that's what the Tobin tax is all about.
That's a very interesting concept.
Yeah.
I want to transition. I have a question for you. And Nanaimo is very unique because we have a very close riding between all the parties, to be honest. So a lot of people like look at polls and then they gauge their vote based on polls, or they're like, oh, I won't vote for this party because it might split the vote, or this kind of idea. Mm-hmm. Like, how would you reaffirm people that we should avoid this type of voting, or maybe you think it's a good thing? Like, what's your perspective on that, where people vote based on this strategy?
Well, when I was a teenager, I campaigned with Tommy Douglas, who is known in Canada as the father of Medicare. He brought in Medicare with an NDP government in Saskatchewan, and then federally in the 60s as a leader of the NDP, working with the Pearson government. And he always said, if you don't vote for what you want, you'll never get it. And so he always talked about the mice voting for the black cats and the white cats. And then, the black cats seemed better, and then they got elected, and then the black cats turned out to be bad. And so they voted for the white cats, and turned out the white cats were just as bad for the mice. And so the mice had to figure out that they needed to vote for themselves. And so that's, one start of it. But we need a proportional representation system in Canada. And in 2015, Justin Trudeau promised that was going to be the last first past the post election. We were going to have proportional representation. And they went through this big process of doing tour across the country and talking to everybody about implementing proportional representation. And then he broke that promise. In 2021, the NDP had a confidence and supply agreement with the Liberal government, and they gave them a 4-year ticket. But they didn't include proportional representation. They've talked about proportional representation lots of times, but they didn't include it in that confidence and supply agreement. And they could have insisted on it. They could have set targets and saying, well, we're only going to hold you up for this year for these budgets, and then we want this done, and then we want this done. That confidence and supply agreement didn't mention climate change. It didn't mention fair taxation. We got some things, some half measures. We got dental care for people on the lowest incomes, which is great, but everybody should get dental care, and you shouldn't have to do your taxes to prove that you're low income before you can take your kids to the dentist. And we got pharmacare for 2 types of medicine instead of the whole raft of medicines. So we really need proportional representation. And there was an opportunity, real power. Both the Liberals and the NDP could have done that. The NDP in British Columbia have had lots of opportunities to bring in proportional representation, and they haven't. So you have to ask why. And so they like the first past the post system, and then every time it's the same thing. The Liberals say, don't vote NDP because you'll split the vote. And the NDP says, don't vote for the Green Party because you'll split the vote. Nobody owns the vote. It doesn't belong to anybody. You got to earn people's trust and prove that you're a hard worker, but also put forward like solid policies, policies that are going to protect people and the planet. That's where we stand, is people and the planet before profits.
Yeah.
Right? Because we've had this series of governments that have given tax cuts, since the late 80s through the 90s and the 2000s. Those tax cuts have not benefited working people very much. I've gotten a little bit back on my taxes from tax cuts. But who they have benefited is the ultra wealthy who went from being multimillionaires to multi-billionaires. And so, you know, the governments, the Liberal and Conservative governments are actually get a lot of guidance from the Business Council of Canada. It used to be the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, you know, the wealthiest folks in the land,
in the country,
running the biggest companies. And they're not interested in proportional representation. They like this swing back and forth between Liberal and Conservative because both really their economic policies aren't that far apart. It's the social policy that gives the wedge issues between them.
Right.
Yeah.
But economically, they're very similar. And we don't really see much difference, honestly, in the NDP when they actually form government.
I wanted to follow up a little bit. A lot of people, I feel, they feel like their leaders won't follow through on what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
How do we know that the leader that we vote for is going to practice what they preach, essentially? I mean, you have a long resume, so it speaks for itself. But how would you answer to that?
Well, you have to trust people and you have to look at their track record. And so that's, you know, when I got elected here, people elected me because they could see what I've done in the community, that I've worked with people who are marginalized in this community. What the films that I make aren't about making money. It's not about just vacant kind of entertainment. It's actually about education, and it's about assisting people. And I've always worked as an ally, you know, to try to lift people up and assist them in, you know, them stepping up and assisting themselves, right? So I've worked with all kinds of marginalized communities. You know, as a filmmaker, I used to do training projects for street-involved youth, for First Nations producers, gay and lesbian, LGBTQ plus folks. I did a program teaching deaf people how to do video. I was working at a training center in Vancouver called Video In, and somebody came in and they were deaf and they said, I want to learn how to do video. And we had all these programs. I said, well, do you have any other friends that are deaf that want to learn too? Because then we can do specific workshops for you. And we ended up doing a training program called Deaf at VI, and they had their own little film festival, which was pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
And so that's just the kind of work that I've done. I'm a working class guy. I haven't worked on gaining a lot of wealth. I've just really actually tried to push the envelope on making sure that we protect people that are most vulnerable in our community. And that's why, you know, I take a job as the executive director of a shelter, even though it doesn't pay super well, and I can make 3 times that amount of money going and working in the film industry, doing Hallmark videos or films. And I just don't want to work on that stuff, you know? Yeah. So when everything went reality TV, the educational shows I was working on got canceled. And I did work on a couple of reality TV shows to raise some funds to go down and work on a project with my wife in Belize. Actually, it was a study she did for VIU for the geography department. And I worked on these terrible reality TV shows. And so at the end, I was like, you know, it's a show I wouldn't want to watch. I spent 40 hours working on it. And so then I was talking to the producers saying, like, I know you guys do some good documentaries. Can I work on some of those? And they're like, well, you don't like this show? And I was like, nope. I wouldn't want to watch it. I wouldn't want my kids to watch it. And I don't want to tell my grandchildren that this is what I was doing. Well, we had an environmental crisis. We had social injustice around the planet. Well, we have this huge wealth inequality. I want to work on some stuff that's actually meaningful. And it was like, okay, well, thank you. And that was it. That's the last time I worked for those guys.
Yeah, fair enough.
Totally. Yeah. One kind of last thing about kind of the economy in Canada. Housing is like a big concern for people right now, and there's a lot of people talking about it in the different parties on different plans and different ideas. A lot of people are saying we need to cut red tape or make construction faster. There's all sorts of stuff floating around right now. What's your take on the current housing situation? Are you on board with building lots more homes, or like how does that float with yourself in the Green Party?
So between World War II and the early 80s, the federal government was involved in funding affordable housing and co-op housing. And then those programs all got cut when the taxes were cut, the programs got cut, starting with the Mulroney Conservatives through the Chrétien years of austerity, lots of tax cuts, lots of program cuts, and then into the 2000s with the Harper government. So we don't have the social infrastructure that we need in this country, and you're always going to need affordable housing. When I ran the shelter for the Unitarians, I did that for 2.5 years. We had folks that had mental health challenges and addiction challenges, and sometimes mental health and addiction challenges. But we also saw a lot of low-wage workers showing up at the door, people with disabilities. I had a VIU student at the shelter for a little while, and seniors. Far too many seniors, people who thought they could retire in this community, renting, and then finding out that the house was sold out from under them, and the list to get into BC housing was like 6 years long.
Yep.
And the oldest senior I had, was 83 years old showing up at the door. No reason why they should be homeless at all, except that they are trying to live on a low income, retire on a low income. And folks in these categories, young people, students, people with disabilities, low-wage workers, low-income seniors, they're always going to need affordable housing. And that's where we should be focusing the government's attention. So, in the debate, I said, the market is going to be the market. We shouldn't be subsidizing developers for market rate housing. And some of the programs that we see for affordable housing, the housing is only affordable for 10 years, and then it goes to market rate, or 20 years under another program, and then it goes to market rate.
Yeah.
That, if we're going to put taxpayers' dollars into affordable housing, it needs to be covenanted so that it remains affordable, and it needs to have a maintenance program attached to it so you have continuing upkeep, right?
Yeah. No, makes sense.
You can't drive the market. We see these proposals from the Conservatives saying, well, if municipalities can't get enough homes built, we're going to punish them by not giving them infrastructure funding. I have a development behind my property that was zoned 10 years ago. They got building permits 8 years ago, and there's still empty lots sitting there. That's the free market. They're deciding when it makes sense for them to build homes. And that has, other implications like the supply chain, interest rates, all those things are factor into what the free market will do. But when you leave it all to the free market decides, well, you can't afford a place, so guess what? You get to go live in your car or show up at a shelter door. We need to make sure we take care of people who are marginalized in our community, who need our support. And we can have other programs, to incentivize. I think, for municipalities, I work at the municipal level right now, having the federal government put money into software systems that help with that permitting process to streamline it, and to assist municipalities with that kind of thing, and to assist municipalities with the infrastructure they need to manage the growth that's happening. So, we have huge growth in Nanaimo, Ladysmith right now, and as we densify, that means bigger water lines, bigger sewer lines, more road maintenance. We need more parks for people, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes really expensive.
Yeah, really fast.
Yeah.
I feel like, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
I feel like there's a lot of regulations when it comes to building permits and being able to pass, getting a building even put up. Do you think that we need to shorten that and
we do
cut out the bureaucracy? Yeah,
the building permits, like I've seen, and those are provincial, by the way.
Okay.
Right. So I've seen building permits stacked up beside each other. Like, this is what it was 20 years ago. This is what it was 10 years ago, and this is what it is now.
Right.
And that's just a lot. It's just too much. Right. So you need to streamline those processes and make things easier for people to build homes.
Yeah. Is there a way the federal government can kind of help push the provincial government in the right direction when it comes to that type of stuff? Or how does that work? Like, when collaborating with your, like, say in our case, David Eby and the provincial government?
Well, there are national building codes,
Mm-hmm.
and there are provincial building codes, and maybe what we need to do, I think, like, part of the issue around telling provinces what to do is they get upset.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like the federal government, coming in and into their jurisdiction. And you'll see that especially in Quebec and Alberta. They get quite upset about those kind of things. So I think, having a process where everybody kind of comes together and works on those things together. And that's also true when it comes to interprovincial trade, right? There's all this protectionism between provinces. It's easier to trade with the United States than it is between provinces. And so we need to, eliminate those kind of barriers. There was the TILMA agreement, Trade, Investment, Labor, Mobility Agreement between the Western provinces, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. But that had those investor provisions in them as well, which we don't want. Yeah, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think I found out about this very recently with all the tariffs, that Canada has more struggles trading interprovincially, which was just mind-blowing to me. It's like that's got to be terrible for the potential of our economy, right? So yeah, I think a good thing, there's like very few positives, but a few positives of the tariffs, I would say it's made Canadians more collective. Like we've come together as a country and have stood up for what we believe is right. And a lot of people are becoming more educated on some of the things that are happening. So some silver linings, but hopefully, and that's why this election's so important too, is because we got to stand up for, these things that they're doing down south that aren't okay.
Yeah, it's a huge wake-up call. Yeah. And I think, coming back to raw logs, exporting raw logs to Oregon and then importing lumber from Oregon, paying a tariff going both ways, doesn't make any sense at all. No. And so now it's becoming very clear. Yeah. And it should be clear to the companies that are doing that if they have a patriotic bone in their body, they should be looking at using their Canadian trees for Canadian jobs and Canadian mills to great Canadian products to build Canadian homes.
For sure. Cool.
I know that the U.S. they have 350 million people, and we have 40 million people. Is there a people problem here? Like, do we not have enough people to be making our own stuff? Because I feel like there's not a lot of products made in Canada that at least I see out on the streets and in shops and stuff.
That's been a choice.
Okay.
Right? So our industries have been undermined, and then we could be doing things quite differently.
Right. No, it's interesting. Anyways, I don't know if you have any more questions, Sean. But...
Yeah, I wanted to, this is just for, because we have a lot of young voters that are listening to this. And so I just wanted to do a little bit of a recap of a previous election. In the 2019 election, people aged 18 to 24, only about 54% of them voted, compared to ages 65 to 74, where roughly 79% of people voted. I feel many young people feel disconnected from politics, and this might be because they don't fully understand the logistics of voting, especially if they haven't reached or received adequate civic education. There might be a lack of interest, lack of knowledge, where to vote, when to vote, how to register, and maybe that their vote won't mean much just because it's their vote. And then an outdated system, just like long lines, register early, voting in person. People are, so glued to their phones, they want to just be able to do that. So what kind of steps do you think could be taken to better prepare young people to participate in elections, and what would your message be for those people?
I'd start with lowering the voting age to 16, so that people start to get used to voting when they're in high school, when they're getting their civics lessons. And we go and we do debates at high schools. I'll always go and talk to school classes, elementary or high school classes, because I think it's really important to engage young people in the process and to understand that it's really their future. If you're leaving the vote to seniors, they're going to be looking out for their interests. And, as a young person, you need to look out for your own interests. So do your research on the parties, find out where they stand on the issues that you're concerned about, because it's your future. And if a party's not standing up on things like climate change or protecting biodiversity, you need to think about that, because we're looking at a biodiversity crash. It is crashing. We're looking at a climate emergency, right? So, and then around economics, like straight up economics, why is it that young people can't even think about owning a home these days, right? The taxation system isn't fair. We need to, that's another proposal that we have as part of that whole tax shifting, is to eliminate taxes for the first $40,000 that you earn. Take it up from $15,700 to $40,000, and give people an opportunity to save for their future.
For sure.
To get through, those earlier processes in life, that I did, like going to school and I've done a lot of grunt, low wage work, right? Some pretty crappy jobs.
Right.
It took a while to get where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
So
no, totally.
And just before we do finalize this, I feel like we'd be doing an injustice if we didn't touch on a couple topics. And one is healthcare.
Yeah.
With the increasing demands on healthcare services, especially in more rural areas, how do you see the future of healthcare, especially in Nanaimo, Ladysmith?
Well, again, this comes back to those tax cuts, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. So the ultra wealthy, they can get in their private jets and fly down south and go to a fancy hospital in the States. But the rest of us are struggling. So 20,000 people in Nanaimo, Ladysmith don't have access to a doctor. Our hospital is 65 years old, would crumble in an earthquake, needs a new patient tower, needs a catheterization lab. We're getting a cancer center, but the new patient tower and the catheterization lab is close to $2 billion of investment. And 40% of that is going to come from property taxes from people who live in the regional district of Nanaimo. And if you ask me, I would say that is completely unfair. It's a tertiary hospital for everybody living north of the Malahat. And we need federal funding. There's a huge deficit in just basic maintenance of hospitals across Canada. Some $30 billion is what the last figure I saw. I'm sure that is much higher now. And the federal government used to put money into capital projects, and they need to do that again. And I lobbied for that when I was the member of parliament before. Our hospital runs at 140% capacity. The regional district of Nanaimo has the highest per capita population over the age of 75 in Canada. People come here to retire. And that is when people use most of their health care. Mm-hmm. That's when most of the healthcare dollars are spent, or in the senior years. And so we need actually a number of changes. One is a change to the way the health transfers work. So right now it's done on a per capita basis, per person, and it should include demographics. So just looking at per capita basis, you get a community the size of Nanaimo in Alberta would get same kind of funding as Nanaimo, but they have a much younger population in Alberta. Yeah. And people are in Alberta and Ontario and other places, they're working there and paying taxes there and then coming here to retire. And their big tax years are spent in other provinces.
Yeah, right.
And so it's not really a fair system. And so we need to revise that system to make it a little fairer. And we need the federal government to step up and put money back in, make sure that we're getting doctors and nurse practitioners and other healthcare professionals trained. And we need to bring in people from other countries. Like, we should have targeted immigration for the things that we need in this country.
Yeah, totally.
We're going through a retirement bulge right now with the baby boomers. And it's leading us into a crisis. And we've known about it for decades.
Yeah.
We've known about it for decades.
Yeah.
I was talking about this like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That we got to work on ensuring that we're ready for this healthcare bulge.
Yeah. Well, it almost seems like common sense that it would be a demographic way rather than what we have it right now.
Yeah.
You'd think that. I didn't even know that wasn't even a thing.
Yeah, it's just strictly per capita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
I think there's some minor adjustment for demographics, but it's not enough.
Right. Right.
Makes sense.
And then kind of the last thing I wanted to touch on, because there's a lot of it here, the homelessness in Nanaimo. Given the visible and growing concern around homelessness in Nanaimo, how are you working to support those affected, and what strategies are in place to creating lasting solutions for them?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I ran a homeless shelter for 2.5 years up until last July, and it is tragic to see the people that show up at at the door. So we need to build that social infrastructure. We need to get as much affordable housing built as possible. And the city of Nanaimo has been working with BC Housing in the province to get a whole bunch of temporary housing built. And so there's about 270 beds coming online in the next 6 months to help with that situation. But, you know, when people think about homelessness, they think about what's going on downtown.
Yeah.
So they're seeing people with mental health and addiction challenges pushing around shopping carts. That is a small chunk of what is actually going on. There are people living in vehicles all over our community, and you can find them if you're looking. You can see them parked out on different roads and in different places. We get emails to city council about people parked in RVs for too long or parked in cars. And you know, if you go out to the malls, you'll see parked cars out there at night, or you go down to Phil Sutton Park or other places,
Right.
You'll see people sleeping in their cars at night. And there's about 6,000 people or more that are on the edge of homelessness in this
Right.
community. So the homeless count, the point in time count had 515 homeless people that counted that day. But the RCMP and the service providers think it's closer to 800 to 1,000 because there's a lot of people that are hard to find
Right.
that aren't showing up to be counted.
Yep.
Right.
No, totally.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that social infrastructure that has been neglected for decades, we need to, you know, buckle down, and we need to triple the amount of affordable housing and co-op housing in this country, like pronto.
Yeah. And more mental health services
Yeah.
accessible as well.
Mental health should be part of our healthcare system.
Right.
So we should, this is going back to the Scandinavian model again, where the healthcare system includes full pharmacare, universal dental care, and mental health. So that's a key problem too, is when you have a young person who can't go and get counseling, they're having trouble, and it costs $100 an hour, $150 an hour. Parents can't afford it, and then things just get worse for them, and then things get out of control, and next thing you know, you've got somebody with mental health challenges on the streets and using drugs.
Yeah.
And I have a personal story related to this, because my cousin, who I was really close to as a kid, we used to play Survivor Guy. We'd go up to Ammonite Falls because my grandfather's place was right there. We would go camping there, basically with a jackknife and a pack of matches.
Wow.
And we would spearfish in Benson Creek and make a fire and eat the fish, eat berries, make our own little shelter forts.
Real camping.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, when he was 18, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Later on, he was living on a farm out in the middle of nowhere, kind of between Lumbee and Enderby, and heard radio. The radio was talking to him, so he phoned the radio station, made some threatening noises. The RCMP phoned him, he made some threatening noises. The RCMP showed up. He had a loaded 30-06 on the couch because a cougar was coming around to kill the chickens, and he had some pot plants. So we ran, and they had a 5-day manhunt for him. And the next time I saw him, he was in Burnaby remand. And when they let him go, they made him take medication, but they wouldn't let him go back to the farm. So we went into Vernon, and that's when the vultures got their talons into him. They moved in with him. They beat the hell out of him. They got him addicted to drugs. They got him involved in petty crime. And he was in and out of the criminal justice system until the last time he got out of jail. He overdosed on toxic opioids in the bathroom of a Greyhound bus. And so he was a good kid and a good guy who happened to have a mental illness.
Right.
And without proper support, community supports, he ended up being left to the vultures. And I see my cousin in people downtown all the time.
Yeah.
And, I had a 75-year-old woman show up at the door of the shelter in early stages of dementia. And I was at my aunt's medical assisted death in her early stages of dementia, and I saw my aunt in that woman. I thought, how is it that this society, we're so wealthy? We are such a wealthy country. Look at all the resources we have that we're giving away to foreign multinationals. How is it that people are living on our streets?
Yeah.
How is it that a 75-year-old woman is showing up at a shelter in early onset dementia?
Yeah, it's not right.
It's not right at all.
Yeah.
And so, like, you look at the Scandinavian countries and you study what they do. There's no multi-billionaires there because they have a very progressive tax system.
Yeah.
And actually after World War II, I think, the tax system in the United States and Canada basically meant that you couldn't become a multi-millionaire.
Right.
You could be wealthy, but you couldn't be stinking rich. And now they just like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Like what? He's closing in on $400 billion. What do you need that kind of money for? Except for totalitarian control, right?
Yeah, you got two opposite ends of the spectrum. You got the ultra rich and the dirt poor, and there's almost no one in between.
Yeah, and everybody in between is struggling, and they're pissed off because they're taxed heavily. The tax burden lies on working people. The tax burden is on people earning less than $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
And the ultra wealthy go through all the tax loopholes and everything else. They got, a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of accountants that can help them skip through everything. And you hear about people like Warren Buffett, who says that his secretary pays more taxes than he does.
Yeah. The craziest thing is I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. But yeah.
Yeah.
Insane.
Well, do you have any more questions you'd like to ask?
No, thank you so much, Paul.
I wanted to open up the floor to you for any of the voters out there if you wanted to.
I've been endorsed by Cooperate for Canada, which looks at all the different aggregates and polls and figures out who has the best chance of defeating a Conservative locally. So I've been endorsed by Cooperate for Canada, Smart Vote Canada, Vote Well Canada, as the progressive candidate for Nanaimo Ladysmith. I've actually, when you look at voting results from, going back, not the 2011 election, but every election since 2011, I've had more votes than any other candidate. So I can do it again. I just need to gather the vote and get people's support. Exercise your democratic rights. Do not give up on it. Do not take it lightly. And if you want proportional representation, fight for it. Harass your politicians to do something about it. Because we could change the electoral system. We should. We should have a system like Germany or New Zealand or Australia. We don't want a system like Italy or Israel, where it's this very pure proportional representation system where very radical people can get elected. But this is your opportunity to do your research, figure out who's going to represent you best in the community, and get out and vote, exercise your democratic right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. This was another episode of Island Time, and we'll see you next time.